Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Pastor Ken, the senior pastor at Vertical Church, and I am excited because this morning we're going to be launching into a new series that I've been doing. I'm getting ready for this, and I want you all to just gravitate and grab a hold of this because I believe there's something for everyone. The series is called Eyewitness. We're going to be studying the Gospel of John together. In fact, I'm encouraging our whole congregation to read this book for yourself, personally, during this time. In fact, listen, I encourage you that if you don't have a Bible you can write in, then you can go out and get a Bible in our Bible, our cafe and bookstore. We have amazing Bibles. In fact, one of the ones I would encourage you, Life Application Bible, is a way that you can get good insights and information. But you need to I'm hoping you'll follow me in this series. I'm hoping you'll make notes on it. And why is this so important? Why am I so excited about this? Because in our culture today, there are so many talking heads that turn around and say, the Gospels were written many years after Jesus lived. They were written, and the reason why they try to say such is because they say, then legend came in, and they're trying to downplay the idea of the miracles and the supernatural. But there is no way you can read the Gospel of John and not realize that it is an eyewitness account. John is telling his story. He is giving everybody the understanding of how he, as a young Jewish boy, came to believe in this man, that he was more than a man. In fact, it is masterful in this respect. And what my hope for you is this, is that for all of us, no matter where you are in this, if you're not yet a follower, I am so glad you're here. Because I really want you to do this. Stop allowing your opinions to be created by all the talking heads and people who say they're experts. How many of you went to college and some college professor said something? Some of you watch talk shows or listen to things in podcasts or YouTube channels. You need to stop listening to all the talking heads and read it for yourself. Because between those two ears is a brain, and you can make your own decisions about this. And that's what I want all of you to have, an open mind and to look at it and make a decision for yourself, because this is the subject that we're going to tackle. I believe it's the most important question that a human being will ever have to answer. And that's this: who is Jesus? Who is Jesus? Because there are implications to that determination. Jesus asked the question, it's the foundation of the Christian church. Jesus asked his disciples one day, he said, who do people say I am? And there are a lot of opinions. There was a lot of opinions in his day, and guess what? Times haven't changed. There are a lot of people who have a lot of opinions about who Jesus is. But what you need to realize, Jesus turned it and made it personal. He said, but who do you say I am? See, it doesn't matter right now what your mama believes. It doesn't matter what your girlfriend believes or your boyfriend believes. It doesn't matter what your grandma, your grandpa, what your spouse believes. What do you believe? Who is Jesus to you? That's what we're going to explore. I'm hoping you have an open mind and an open heart, because at the end of this, what I'm really desiring is that all of you would fall in love with Jesus and see him in a way maybe you've never seen him before. Because we're going to look at it raw. We're going to look at it real. We're going to look at the claims and the ideas of what it was. And in essence, this book is also a manual for discipleship. If you are truly a follower of Jesus, then this book is for you. Because it is going to give us clear delineation and understanding of what it truly means to be a follower of Jesus. So if you have a Bible this morning, you can turn in John's Gospel. If you're brand new to the Bible, listen. The New Testament opens with 4 eyewitness accounts of the life of Jesus: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. John was the youngest of Jesus' disciples, the youngest follower of him. And John, now in his later years, most people believe this is the last gospel witness, a testament of it. And John is writing because there are some things that are happening in his culture, and John realizes before he dies, he needs to leave his own account of the life of Jesus, because in that particular day, in that particular time, there were many people who had ideas about it, and there was the Jewish community and there was the Greco-Roman world. And John needed to deal with an issue head on, and this is what we're going to tackle. Because when you talk about who is Jesus, John deals so unfiltered. All the rest of the Gospels deal with this issue, but John deals with it straight on and confronts the issue, and that is this: the deity of Jesus Christ. Many people try to say, oh no, Jesus was this, but he wasn't God. And we're going to deal with the subject head on. Because John tells us, if you found your place, look at John chapter 20. John tells us why he wrote his account. He gives us the reasons why he's writing what he writes. He says, Jesus performed many other signs. Now, John calls the miracles that he saw in his book, he deals with them as signs. Because why? What is a sign? When you read a sign, what does it do? It gives you direction, right? It points to something. He's saying that these things that Jesus did weren't random. They were pointing to something. They were a billboard declaring, this is who I am. And so John says, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. In fact, he said, if I had recorded all of them, the books couldn't have even contained all of my eyes have seen. But he goes on to say in verse 31, but these are written. In fact, the ones that he chose to write about, these are written. Why? That you may. Look at this word may. In your Bible, circle it because that's conditional. In other words, John's writing, this is what his hope is. This is what his desire is, okay? These are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Now, writing to the Jewish community, he's expressing this end. This is the one you've been waiting for. This is the Messiah. But also writing to the Greco-Roman world, he said, the Son of God. So John recognizes that both sets of communities, because as Paul said, the gospel is to the Jew first and also to the Greek. In other words, he is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing, you may, here's the word may again, circle that, you may have life in his name. He said that believing has an implication. It can, it's not guaranteed, it can provide life. Two words I want to highlight. These are in your notes, but let me highlight this, what he brings up here. Number one is the word believe. Because the word believe in John's writings are not sometimes the way we deal with the believe. Believe is the Greek word pisteo, and it means to be persuaded. Do you know why so many people can be talked out of faith? It's because they were never talked into it to begin with. They were never rooted or grounded in the truth because they haven't, listened to me, they have never examined the eyewitness testimonies. They've never looked at the evidence that the resurrection of Jesus and of those who saw such left behind. That's why so many can be easily talked out of it, because they've never been persuaded into it. Because to be how are you persuaded? Why did you walk away? Some of it, why did you doubt in some ways? Because some expert said so? Like, what gives them credibility on that end? And so many on this front is that you need to know for yourself personally. That's what John's writing. He goes, to be persuaded, it means to place one's confidence in, to trust. Now here's the point. The word signifies reliance upon. No, guys, you've gone too fast. Go back, please. Reliance upon, not mere credence. In other words, there's a lot of you say you believe, but your actions are in no way equal to what you say you believe. And the Bible gives us the realization that that's just wishful thinking. That is not believing. Believing is when you come to trust. And you don't know that you truly trust until you're willing to do something with what you say you believe. And if you've never acted on what you say you believe, you have never biblically believed. Do you realize what he's saying here? That there are implications. Why? Because listen, believing, remember I said believing has an implication that John said something that happened. He said that believing you might have what? Life. The word life in the Greek is the word zoe. The word zoe. And hard for Greek interpreters to deal with this word, because the word zoe has its origin and its understanding in God. What do I mean by that? The word zoe is life as a principle. It's life in the absolute sense. Generally speaking, we don't kind of understand all that, because God is light, John wrote, and in him there is no darkness at all. Absolutes means that there's no part. God is life. In other words, there's no death, no decay. God designed and created. He made us to live, okay? The life God designed us to live, this is what Zoe is. It is the life of God. It's life as God has it. It represents God's life. You see, when man was created by God, when God placed man into the garden, what we call the Garden of Eden in Genesis 2, in the middle of that garden were two trees. There was a tree of life, which means that man was to consume. Somehow, some way, God infused his life in that there was this exchange realization. The man was designed to live by the life of God. But it's more than that. It's a quality of life. It's a manner in which we choose to live. It is a lifestyle that is consistent with how God lives. That's how we were designed to live. But if you know the story, the second tree in the Garden of Eden was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In other words, man seized the opportunity to define good and evil on their own terms. And what was the result of it? It brought death. And we have a lot of heartache because we go around trying to define for ourselves what is good and what's bad. And God says, no, follow me, believe in me, trust in me. And Jesus, listen to me carefully, Jesus is the return to the tree of life because he was nailed to a cross. And it's at that cross, humankind was led back to be able to partake of the tree of life. There is life in him. And so we're going to talk about all this because, again, believing has implications to it. But we can live life. And that's why discipleship for so many of you, if we were to display more of the life of God in the way our mannerisms, the way we operate and act, how attractive would that truly be? But I don't want to get ahead of myself. So he says this. So John, and this is brilliant. If you can turn to John chapter 1. Let me kind of lay it all out for you, give you the 24,000 view down on this. The book of John starts chapter 1 as a prologue. So John sets up in the first chapter claims about the life of Jesus that he's about to discuss through the rest of his discourse. Okay, and then the last chapter, chapter 21, is an epilogue, which is a reminder to those who are followers of Jesus what it truly means to be a follower of Jesus. And so we're going to begin to discover this end because John, he's so masterful. This is so brilliant. Why and how he crafted this. And guys, here is an unshameful plug for my podcast. I go so much deeper into so many things that I'm not going to deal with on Sunday morning. But digging deeper with Pastor Ken is the design to keep the conversation from Sunday going and for all that are really hungry to truly get into it that way. So I'm going to deal with a lot of those ends for those who really, really want to know. So there's something here today for everyone, but listen, John sets it all up and he gives these times and he talks about this. And so these are the things that John begins to say. John 1:1, John begins his gospel this way. He said, in the beginning, and what is he referring to? Every Jewish reader understood exactly. This is a reference to Genesis 1:1. Genesis 1:1 said, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Every Jew knew that. Gentiles may not know that or may know that, okay? But that's why John had this realization that he wants you to know that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. So he deals with the deity. He says, what? In the beginning was the Word. And the word here is the word logos, which is brilliant. Because he said, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, when we think about our words are an embodiment of our mind and our will. Now, you're not your words. They're distinct and separate from you, but they are a part of you. Do you understand that? In that, it used to be an old adage, a man is as good as his word. Now we've lost the total concept of that, all right? But there's an aspect of what John is saying is that Jesus is distinct and separate from God, but he is the embodiment of God. This is such a bold claim. Now listen to me. Coming from a young Jewish boy who grew up on these ends, this seemed blasphemous because the Jews were the ones who held strong to the idea that there was not polytheism, that there was only a monotheism, there's only one God. So when you begin to talk about the deity of Jesus Christ, it blows their mind. Now imagine how difficult it was for John to come a hold of this concept. But what he saw, the signs that he saw and the things that he experienced led him to the conclusion that Jesus was more than just a man. He was in truth the Word. He was God. Now look at verse 14. He goes on to say this. He goes, and the Word became flesh. In other words, God took on a bod. The Word became flesh. God became human. Do you realize the implication in that? God became human and made his dwelling. The word dwelling here, again, John is a good Jewish boy. He uses the Hebrew word from the aspect of tabernacle. When we say dwelling, tabernacled. And why is that important? To the Jewish mind, the realization the tabernacle represented where the glory of God resided. All that represented God, the essence, the presence, the Shekinah glory of God. John is saying, the claim he's making here is that we have seen him, and he is a human being. He became flesh, but he dwelt among us. He tabernacled among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father and is full of grace and truth. Now look at this next claim in verse 18. He says this, no one has ever seen God. That's true. But the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. Why is it this important? Because you and I will never know God apart from Jesus. See, people have had these discussions over the centuries, and people have misunderstood the God of the Old Testament in so many ways. In fact, I remember listening to this conversation. Two people I don't agree with the things that they're in, but I listen to a lot of people I don't agree with because I want to know where they're coming from. I want to have an open mind. And I also love people, so you want to know how to respond. But at this conversation, these two people were having, and they're like, well, Jesus, he's the Son of God? Would he come around to correct his dad? Because they look at the Old Testament and they say, well, I don't understand. Because a lot of people have had questions about God. People have had questions about God all the time in our culture. What is God like? Well, Jesus came to manifest or to show us exactly what God is like. That's the claim John's making. That if you want to know God, as the Father, so is the Son. When you want to see, Jesus said, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. Do you realize John's whole gospel is written by these controversies? Jesus makes claims. Look at this. In fact, this is where, if you want, you can take pictures of the screen. I'm going to go past this quick. I'll cover this in the podcast. But look at the seven titles, the very first chapter here. I'm going to encourage you to find them and circle them in your own Bible, in your own time. But listen, 7 titles made about Jesus in John chapter 1. John's setting it up, and he's about to deal with all of this. The titles, the Lamb of God, the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of Israel, the Son of Man, Rabbi, Jesus of Nazareth, in other words, the fully human one. All of these claims about the life of Jesus, these were titles Jesus was given. John's going to deal with all these, but in his gospel, this is so brilliant. John loves sevens and comes back to this again. And so John makes 7 claims that Jesus made about himself. And I want you to note the first 2 words, I am. All Hebrew people understood. That's why they knew exactly what Jesus was claiming about himself, why they took up rocks and wanted to stone him, or why the Sadducees and Pharisees wanted to have him executed, because he, being a man, claimed equality with God. He used the name, the most sacred. When God appeared to him on the top of Mount Sinai in a burning bush, and Moses asked the question, he said, if the people ask me, what is your name? What do I tell them? Here was God's answer, Yahweh. The Hebrew word Yahweh means I am that I am. I am the self-existent, ever-existent one. And so Jesus said, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the gate of the sheep. I am the good shepherd. And every time he makes one of these claims, what you discover in John's gospel is that there's this controversy that arises. Jesus does a sign, makes a claim, and then he's left the crowd to decide for themselves. And you have a bunch of people who say, he's gone too far. They get offended by what he said. And then a bunch of other people that agree and believe. And it's no different than today. That's the way John's gospel works in our culture today. That's why my heart is that you would walk through this for yourself. Is that I am the gate of the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the true vine. Look at this next one. 7 times Jesus uses the name of God, okay? In John 4:26, the woman at the well, she said, when Messiah comes, he goes, I am. In other words, he was saying in Hebrew, Yahweh, you've just seen him. John 6:20 with the disciples on the boat. John 8:24 to the crowds, including the Pharisees. John 8:28. That's why the Pharisees were like, picked up stones. Jerusalem became a hotbed of violence and tension for Jesus. Okay? John 13:19, John 18:15. When the soldiers, the last one, when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane and the soldiers came to arrest him, and they said, we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. You read it in your Bible, it says, I am. Now you read most English translations say, I am he. But he just said, Yahweh. And you know what happened? They all fell back. The power of God was released because he was relying. And Jesus surrendered the realization that, yes, I'm God, and this is why I came, to die for man. Powerful, powerful. But this is where we're going to study through the course of this. We're going to be looking at these 7 signs John provides as eyewitness testimony to his gospel. And today we're going to look at the first one, water to wine. This is going to lead us all the way up to Easter, because the 7 signs that John highlights in his gospel, the healing of the nobleman's son, the healing of the paralyzed man at the pool, the feeding of the 5,000, the healing of the man born blind, the raising of Lazarus from the dead, and the ultimate and last sign of all, which it took all of his closest followers to see that one before they truly believed who he was, which is his own resurrection. So are you ready? Let's jump into it today. Here's the title. We had a lot of fun putting these titles together, but today's title is called Happy Hour, because we're going to talk about turning water into wine. You're like, you got to be kidding me, Pastor Ken. You're talking about that in church? Now listen, I want to debunk some of the stuff I've heard taught over the years, because it just doesn't hold wine. I was going to say it doesn't hold water. But it's like, listen, there's some people that try to say to me, and one tried to even prove it to me, who was a minister that I respected. He said, no, Jesus didn't turn it into wine, he turned it into grape juice. I can prove it by the Greek. I'm like, dude, I read the same Greek Testament you do. I'm like, well, I'm like, but it doesn't even fit context, bro. Doesn't fit context. So we won't see that today, okay? So look at this. John chapter 2, verse 1. Let's jump in together and look at it. It said, on the 3rd day, a wedding took place at Cana of Galilee. Let me give you a little background history so you can kind of appreciate what's going on. Because this is the culture. This is how people got engaged, or I should say engaged. This is how marriage happened in the Jewish culture, okay? Most marriages were arranged, but when 2 people decided that they were going to marry, what we call today engagement. You know, a man gives a rock to a girl and says, I want to marry you. Well, they made a commitment even more serious. At the moment that they asked and she accepted, they were considered by Jewish law married, which is why the controversy of Mary getting pregnant during this waiting period. Because what was the responsibility of the groom? After she said yes, his job was to go build a house for them to live in. His job was to go and provide for all of the occasion and the festivities, because listen to me. If you're a father and you have daughters and you have to pay for a wedding, right now you're going to be thankful you weren't an ancient Jew. Because do you know how long a feast and celebration went on back in the day that Jesus lived in? 1 whole week. You have trouble feeding your relatives for a day, okay? And he's like, you got to take care of your guests for a week. And this was a culture that honor and shame were so embedded in the way you hosted people, the way you treated people. Imagine if you are a dad and you were giving, you're giving your daughter away and you paid for this reception, okay? And all of a sudden, they came and tapped your shoulder halfway through the reception and said, they're out of food. And half the guests hadn't yet been served. Now, you might be embarrassed, but in that culture, you would never live that one down. There was so much shame attached to all this, okay, that you got to understand, this is a part of the story. This is a part of what goes on. So here, on the 3rd day, a wedding took place in Cana of Galilee. It's about 9 miles north of Nazareth, okay? Jesus' mother was there, and we kind of get an indication that this must have been somebody close to Jesus and his family. Because by the time this was taking place, and this is important that you understand a fact, Jesus had left his family to pursue what he had come to earth to be, the Messiah. In other words, most commentators, most Bible scholars determined by this period of time Joseph had died. Jesus had been responsible because he was the oldest, taking care of his family, but he had already made arrangements and had left that responsibility, and now was bringing disciples to himself and fulfilling the ministry that he came for, okay, to be the Messiah of Israel. And that's what was happening. And so by this particular time, and why that's important, you'll see it in a minute, but Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. Because hospitality in that culture is like, yeah, you come and all your your boys, you can bring your whole posse, come on, okay? Because it's a hospitality culture, right? And so Jesus goes to the wedding with his disciples. Now look at the tension that arises. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother, now in John's gospel, he never names Mary by name, probably to avoid confusion with the other Marys that are mentioned in Jesus' life. And she's only mentioned it's called Jesus' mother twice. She's mentioned here in this story and at the cross. And John plays a significant role in each time. But he calls her Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. So obviously she had to be in the know. Obviously, before the guests or anybody else knew, she absolutely had some way, probably some level of responsibility there. And so she comes to Jesus. And look at what he says to her. Look at verse 4. Woman. Now, if you're a young person here, this is not the way you should address your mama. You're like, but Jesus did. No, let me help you, okay? Literally in Greek, this really means my lady. He's in a formal setting, and he addresses her not as mom, because there's two things going on here. Number one, he shows her respect, but Jesus is making Mary, as well as everyone else around, understand that their relationship is changing. Because although she brought him into the world, he was the one that actually created her. And literally, although she had raised him, now she had to look at him no longer as her son, but as her Savior. And Jesus, see, the denomination I grew up in, and please do not hold your stones for a minute, okay? Okay, a lot of them try to teach that Mary was a mediatrix. In other words, she can go to Jesus to get stuff done for you because she had a special in because she was his mama. That is not what this passage is talking about. And so Jesus says to her, my lady, why do you involve me? Literally in Greek, it says, what is this to do with you and me? In other words, and then he says this, which is significant. Jesus replied, my hour has not yet come. John uses this term because Jesus constantly brings this issue up. The hour in which his glory would be made known to all was when he would be exalted on the cross. That's when he would be crowned the king of Israel. That's what John is pointing to. Jesus said to Nicodemus in a conversation in the next chapter, you'll discover that what he says to him, he says, when the Son of Man is lifted up, he will draw all men unto himself. And he made the direct reference that as Moses had put a snake on a pole, okay, so the Son of Man will be lifted up. That his point of glory is in a way that nobody would have expected or saw. He said, my hour has not yet come. But you see, this wedding feast was perfect time for Jesus' first miracle because he makes a statement through what he's about to do that was to everybody. So let's read along here. Jesus replied, my hour has not come, but look at what his mother said. Now, if you're taking notes, if you have your Bible, this is an area where you need to highlight this. It says, his mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Underline that. That's a key to understanding what goes on here. Do whatever he tells you. Now, obviously, I have no idea what it would have been like to, have a son, Jesus, okay? It's hard enough with my two boys, but how do you deal with a boy who never messes up? Who never sins, okay? Imagine being a brother or a sister to Jesus. And yes, for all my Catholic friends, he had brothers and sisters, sorry, but it's true, okay? He had brothers and sisters, half brothers, half sisters, okay? But here in essence, Jesus, imagine being, if you're brother to Jesus, what are you blaming him for, okay? But Jesus, he must have been highly resourceful in the household. Okay? Because she says, do whatever he tells you to do. By this time, he was taking care of his family. So, but look at the next verse. Nearby, stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for the ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Imagine that. 6 of these. This is somewhere between 120 and 180 gallons. That's a lot of water, isn't it? Make note of that. We'll come back to it in just a second. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water so they fill them to the brim. Now notice this. What did he tell them to do? Fill the jars. That was the first thing he told them to do, right? Notice he didn't tell them to do anything else until the first thing was done, right? So they filled them to the brim, verse 8. And then he told them, now, draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. They did so. Okay? Now verse 9. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. And here's why I said it doesn't fit context if you try to just say it's grape juice. Because he says this, and he did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. And then he called the bridegroom aside and said, what? Look at this, verse 10. He said, everyone brings out the choice wine and then the cheap wine after guests have had too much to drink. Come on, aren't we like that as human beings? I always tell women, listen, don't be fooled by first dates. Because every guy puts on their best foot forward in the beginning. You got to see what after wine comes. You got to say, am I willing to live with that? Because that's probably what he's going to serve most of the time. Sorry, guys. Or opposite end, guys. What she's serving up on the first day may not be what it's going to be like later on. Because why? We always do that. We put our best foot forward, but if you hang around long enough, you find out what people are really like. Right? And he said, what? This is the way people normally operate. You put all the good stuff out. People have well drunk. Their taste buds are not as distinguished anymore. Okay? They've had a little too much to drink. It all tastes good by then. He said, but you've saved the best till now. Verse 11. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first. And notice again, he calls them signs. These miracles, he doesn't call miracles, he calls them signs because they're not random. You see, the very first thing and why this was significant, he said the first signs through which he revealed his glory and his disciples believed in him. Why was this the first one? Because Jesus was introducing the Messianic kingdom, that he was the king who had come. And why was this significant? Because to all Jewish believers, the signs and what the prophets had spoken regarding the Messianic kingdom would be like a great feast with lots and plenty of new wine. A wine so generous and so plenteous. You go back, read Isaiah 26. You read the book of Joel. You read all of these different, I could give you, again, listen to the podcast. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but listen to me. You go back and understand Jesus was making the declaration in this regard. I am the one who has come, and this is my Messianic kingdom. And here's important. If you're taking notes, this is so critical. This is so critical. Is that John provides eyewitness evidence to 7 signs that reveal who Jesus is. Yes, thank you. Now go to the next one. I missed that before. But here, listen, Jesus' kingdom came to change the nature of man's relationship with God. You see, those 6 stone water pots represented for the Jews their ceremonial washing. Jesus turns the ordinary into something extraordinary. In other words, what he's about to do for humankind is the only thing that cleanses humankind from all guilt and shame. You don't have to go through religious tradition. You don't have to go through all the other things that you sometimes feel like you need to do. Because I watch it today. People do that when they have a misunderstanding about God. They messed up. They show back up at church. They're like, Pastor, what can I do? Because they feel so guilty. And I want you to know that you don't need to walk around with guilt or shame. If you've been snoozing, if you've been shopping on eBay, I need your undivided attention right now. Because you're like, man, this is all boring. Let me speak to you directly. Because Jesus is the revelation of God. That ceremony ran out of wine, did it not? Whose responsibility was that? Wouldn't that have been the groom? You see, you sometimes think that God doesn't care about the little things in your life. Sometimes you think that God is a fault finder. Here, Jesus covers this groom's shame. He keeps his reputation intact. Because what? Love covers a multitude of sin. You see, God is for you. God cares about the things of your life. You think that somehow, some way, God in heaven, he's got the whole world to oversee. What are the things that are going on in my life? Why would he care? But I want you to know this story speaks to you to realize that everything going on in your life, God cares about. God will help you with. God is not distant. He knows exactly the things you struggle with, and he comes to help you. But how does he help you? See, John said he wrote this so that we would believe. Why? But because by believing, we might have life. Listen, I need your undivided attention. How did this miracle occur? Remember I said Mary's the key to this. What'd she say to the servants? Do whatever he says. See, if you're a follower of Jesus, believing means that you come to the place in life that you do what he says. But do you know why many of you haven't really received from God the way you want to receive from God? You haven't experienced the life that God's designed, because what did Jesus tell the servants to do first? Fill the water pots full, right? Now, that's a lot of water to carry, isn't it? Now, did they know what he was going to do? No, nobody knew we read it, we have hindsight, okay, which is 2020. No, they didn't know what he was going to do, right? Carrying the water there wasn't easy. Notice, most of the time, God tells us to do something. We might start out doing it, but then we complain. This is tougher than I thought. And you don't actually fulfill what he told you to do the first time, because the second command didn't come till the first one was complete. Here's a word for some of you in this building today. The reason why God hasn't been able to do more in your life is because the first thing he told you to do, you haven't completed. You haven't fulfilled it. You're wanting God to do something new. Go back and fulfill what he told you to do the first time. Because if Jesus is God in a bod, then what he says has the ability to change everything. What did Jesus do? He turned the ordinary into extraordinary. And you see, if you're a true follower of Jesus, if you're a disciple, here's what you need to understand. He wants you to live a life that's not normal. He wants you to live a life that's extraordinary. In other words, if you're married, he doesn't want your marriage to just get dull and boring. He wants you to stay intoxicating. But how? How does that happen? If you're in a career, Jesus wants you to be fruitful. He wants you to be prosperous. He wants you to be absolutely a leader in your marketplace. But how? You see, whatever the issue, your finances, your health, whatever the key is what Mary said. Whatever he says, do it. You got to do the first one. They didn't just fill it halfway. Partial obedience isn't obedience at all. And that's the problem is some of you got tired, you got halfway full, and you're like, isn't that good enough? And no, who is speaking? See, you have to ask the question, who is Jesus? Because when he's God, then what he says is 100% something you need to follow. Because guess what? Did they know what doing it would accomplish? Nor do you know why, what he asked you to do, what will it accomplish. But you see, you want to know. Be honest. I mean, come on, we're in church. You can confess. Be honest. Most of us, we want to know, well, what do you do? If I do this, what will you do? And it's like this bargaining thing. Well, the question is, who is Jesus? Because if he's God, then we do what he says because he knows more than I know. Who's in charge? You see, you have to come to the realization because the second command didn't come to the first. They filled it to the brim. You see, I don't believe he would have told them because I don't believe the water changed to wine until he said, now take some of it and go to the master of the feast. Now you want that second command, but you haven't even done the first one. And why I say that some of you don't believe, because when Jesus tells you to forgive the person that hurt you, you have 1,001 reasons why you don't need to do so. When you're married and Jesus says, hey, listen, I know you're upset what your spouse did, but I want you to love them with the love that I have. And you have 1,001 reasons why you don't need to do that. See, the question is, are we followers of Jesus? This book is a manual for discipleship because it's the first realization, who is he? Because if you're taking notes, here's the big idea that I want you to get today. The more we come to believe who Jesus is, the more inclined we are to do what he says. because you will never experience the life that God intended for you until you're willing to do what he says. See, the truth is eating from the tree of life is learning to adapt and mold your life around the teachings and views of Jesus. It's not arguing with God why your view and why your area is superior. It's not telling God, well, my professor said this, the science community says this, blah, 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 blah. Okay? The reality of it is this. Who is Jesus? That's why people are talked out of their faith so quickly, because they've never come to the realization, for me personally, who is Jesus? Because he's alive. He's still doing today what he did 2,000 years ago. But it doesn't happen apart from obedience to what he says. Whatever he tells you to do, do it. Because the miracles of your life, see, God wants to turn the ordinary issues of your life into something absolutely extraordinary. Because the kingdom has come. Jesus is Lord. And he has the ability to change your life in ways more than your mind can even conceive. But you have to let down that aspect of always wanting to be in control, always having to know the end from the beginning. And you're not God. The question is this: can you trust him? Because trust is the willingness. Because you are who you say you are, I will do what you say. And there we begin to experience the life that God intended for us to live.